I got into this because of my own suffering. If I didn't do something other than what I was doing, my fire, my soul would just die. If I just did normal medicine, I would have died inside. I hated it. My question was, do you want to save lives or support people to have lives?
Welcome to Unstoppable Brain. I'm Dr. Kyra, and we're here to translate neuroscience into behavior change and the life you want. Today, we welcome Dr. Eva Selhub, physician, resilience expert, author, former Harvard Medical School instructor, who's going to show us what is going on in our brains when we are stressed out, our dopamine is tanking, we are burned out, and maybe we're seeking nonstop stimulation from our phones. Dr. Selhub is going to unpack all of that and show us how to break cycles of stress that we didn't even think we could break. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation.
So, first of all, I'm going to be weird and ask you a question like, how in the heck did you make your career about like the soft stuff, emotional intelligence, resilience, spirituality, being in nature in the middle of Harvard and Massachusetts General Hospital? Like, I've been there. I know what that place feels like and what the currency of status is, if you will, and
Yeah.
I don't even know how you survive that, but
Well, I
please.
I I practically didn't. So, to be frank, I almost got fired multiple times until I basically left. Um, but I did manage to be there for 20 years. So,
That's
and I
amazing.
think I think it's like it's a very interesting question nowadays because what we do or what I'm doing is so common now. You look around and everybody and their mother is, singing accolades about meditation or spirituality or what have you. But, I started 30 years ago, 1997.
Yeah,
So
and the fact that you had, like, an advanced degree too, my assistant just, shared a data point with me that, like, most of the current health and wellness influencers who have the biggest followings don't have any formal training, and I'm not
no.
putting that down because we both know that people can know things, but, for you to come from kind of the hallowed halls and the rigor of the scientific background that you come from, and then to also want to weave in what most people, even in California, would call woo-woo. How did you walk that line? How did you not get fired for 20 years and
Yeah.
still push forward that very weird idea?
It's a good question because I started out, when I finished my residency and to answer your question, I got into this because of my own suffering. It's an interesting thing because my friend and I had this conversation. People say you're so brave, and I say I don't think I was brave. It was like do or die for me. That if I
Mhm.
didn't do something other than what I was doing, my fire, my soul would just die. If I just did normal medicine, I would have died inside. I hated it. I couldn't do it. I needed something more. The first moment was 1996 when I was a resident, in Boston City Hospital, so you trained around there, so you know what that's like, and in '96, we had a huge percentage of our patients had AIDS, HIV,
Yeah.
and I was exposed to HIV. I was doing a procedure and the needle, slipped and went into my finger, and it was at a time when there was really nothing one could do about it. The NIH had just that moment released a study on post-exposure prophylactic cocktail. It was, I think, 14 pills a day for 6 weeks, and I went on that. I was one of the first people on that cocktail. So you can imagine, 28 years old, you think you're going to go and my goal was to be a chief resident, do academia, do fellowship, be a ICU doctor, all these things that are based in, like, I guess, real medicine, as people would call it, and I was stopped in my tracks.
Mm.
And, 6 weeks of being on a medication that made me quite sick, 6 weeks of being in absolute distress, 6 weeks of no one's going to love me now. I'm not lovable. I'm not hireable. I'm deeply in debt. And my parents are going to be stuck with my loans because I'm going to die. All these thoughts that just filled me. And also like, is this worth it? Was it worth it? Was risking my life for this, was it worth it? And that answer was no. And so, uh, that it was sort of this sort of big aha that like, "Okay, if there is a God and you let me live," was sort of that was my bargaining, "If you do let me live and I do turn out okay, I gotta do something different because this isn't it. This saving lives thing, that's not it because all we're doing is we're perpetuating the sickness."
Yeah.
And not that it's not valid, my dad has spent 40 years being saved by modern medicine. He would not be alive if it wasn't for that. However, my question was, do you want to save lives or support people to have lives?
Ooh,
What does you want for yourself?
right.
And it
Oh,
was the
wow.
latter. So
Wow.
that was the big changing point. That year was devastating itself. I was had the needle stick, and then my dog died, grandfather died. Somebody started harassing me, writing letters to the medical board. I had to take them to court, for harassment. Uh, then my apartment burned down and I lost everything and had no renter's insurance. And then my father had a heart attack all within a 5-month period. Needless to say, I burned out.
Oh
So
my
I just
gosh.
kind of had this big life lesson even before I finished my residency.
So, I know a lot of people who have had compounded disaster, trauma, devastation that is just, like what you're describing, like where it just like all, chrysalises together into one moment. And what would you say to because that terrifies most people who have not had that happen, you know? What would you say about the pressure forces, the transformational forces, the kind of like what's on the table in that moment when you're in that just whitewash of crisis and loss and grief and trauma and all of it? Like how do you now, who you are now, describe that moment that might be helpful for people who are listening and watching who are like, "Oh, I don't wanna be like that person," but it happens to all of us in our own way at some point in our life, maybe not as dramatic, we don't wanna get into comparisons, but there's some real wisdom there that I wanna harvest from you in this moment because that is a terrifying thing that people want to avoid at all costs, but inevitably we need to know about stories like yours to remember and get our bearings when we're in that kind of storm.
Right. And with this and you're right, there's so much fodder there, which is really, the reason why I do what I do. That was sort of it. And the first of all, we think, "Oh, I can't do it. I just can't." Right? And the thing is you can. And, that's why, like, the work I started doing was on resilience because we are so incredibly resilient. Everyone's resilient. It's a spectrum. And that's the thing, like, we can. We don't want to. I don't want to go through that again, but could I? Yes. I mean, we can. Is it devastating? Is it psychologically tormenting? Does it affect so many things about our lives? Absolutely. But do we recover? Does the human system have the capacity to recover and keep going? 1,000%. Now, the question is, at what level do I keep going? We know that we keep going. We've just seen it time and time and time again. Everyone has been through something and you keep going. You fall down, you get back up. The question is how bruised am I or broken? And that getting back together, have I come back together whole or have I come back together with missing pieces? Right? And it's not that they're missing, they're just sort of uh, deadened or retracted and safeguarded. When the nervous system is sort of on fight or flight, and it's so the first thing is to remember is this too shall pass, and to remember that we have the capacity to handle quite a bit. Now, do we want that to happen? No. Can we handle it? Yes. Can we handle it better if we have a lot of wiggle room, like to manage the adversity so that we bounce rather than crash? Yes, and that's where the learning is. The learning is how we can bring in love and nurturance and softness and support and all those other things that allow that recovery process to then be better, be swifter. And that's where, it comes in with medicine. That's how this got combined for me in science and medicine. So when you say, is it woo woo? It's never been woo woo for me because there was always a validation in the science for me. There was always sort of bringing it back to when I have this, even spirituality, right? Human beings evolved with the capacity to see outside of what's in front of us so that we could mitigate uncertainty more effectively. Without it, that sort of belief that everything is what it is and there's nothing more to that, that actually leads to depression, less motivation, and less ability to handle difficulty. So that imagination is part of our biological need and allows us to survive more effectively, to problem solve more effectively, to be with others more effectively. So all these things that we consider woo-woo for me were real. They were real because they helped me in my life and helped my patients, and then I found the science to back it up.
I'm with you. I am gonna unpack a couple things there. One is I think there's a like almost a weaponization of the word resilience, and I would put grit in that category as well. So I'm just
Yep,
thinking of, the mindset of the listener or the audience sitting here going, okay, I want to get with you, but in order to get my vote or to get me on board, how does resilience not become a judgment against me to, be resilient? Or I've seen this in mindfulness too. Like I was in the early days of mindfulness research and that sort of thing. And, you know, and doctors that I knew who were going through mindfulness training, they said, yeah, like you get mindfulness training and then the system just says, well, just be more mindful and you'll be able to handle this like increased workload, and it's just a form of punishment, if you will,
that's
with
right.
some of these things.
Yeah,
So that's what I'm trying to get at that so that we don't lose, people's trust or hope or belief that this is a way out because we're just so jaded, like right now we're at a time when people are so jaded to things like that, to positive things. And so when someone like yourself who's been to hell and back says, "Hey, you can go to hell and back and not be burned, like you can survive it." There is a kind of othering that we have to get over in the conversation first so that there is an uptake, if you will, of the medicine that you're bringing so that, there isn't this kind of like, you know, immune system reaction to the word resilience or, you can do it or that kind of thing. So maybe help us understand what is it that gives you the confidence that we are resilient or, for those who are maybe, entertaining this idea of maybe I could be resilient, but they're still skeptical or they're still jaded from another experience or having been burned in the past, what would you say to help lift them out of that doubt?
such a good question. And I think the first thing that's important is to actually understand what resilience is. So I think, and this is the same with spirituality, these words that somebody defined because they did research around it, but they research was limited. The definition is limited. And so the first thing is to understand what resilience actually is and that it's not only grit. It's like saying, I'm awake all the time, but I don't sleep, that I just push through it and I never sleep. But that leads to illness and sickness. It's that going all the time and never stopping, that it's daytime all the time and never night, that it's always winter and never summer. Okay. So resilience, if you look at nature, is about cycles and rhythms and ups and downs and ins and outs and flows, right? And ebbs and flows, not just go. And
Mhm.
so grit is part of it. Yes. It's saying that I'm going to, despite this, I'm going to keep going. Sometimes, though, when I'm being mindful and aware, and I never like the term mindfulness because for me, it's about awareness. I'm awareness of the comings and goings of that energy, and I know when to stop and when to go. And about restoration and filling up my gas tank so that I can go
Mm.
is very different. So resilience is a spectrum. Everybody is resilient, period. Just getting out of the womb and getting in the first 10, 15 years of life is a big deal. Okay, it's not easy. Getting through any part of life, getting up in the morning and getting to work and paying your bills, that's a big deal that we take for granted. It's not that easy. So being able to manage the stress in our lives and being able to wake up every day and keep doing that, that is resilient. Okay? The spectrum is, like I said, when you fall down and you get back up. Are you getting back the same as you were before, or are you getting back injured? Now, through the course of our lifetime, we're not as pliable, right? So, resilience is not just about grit, making it through it, being strong. It's all about flexibility, adaptability, pliability. Okay. Like a child is very pliable, but they're not that strong. I like to use the example of branches at the different levels of their uh, maturation. Right, you've got a baby branch which is very flexible. A huge pile of snow falls in it, doesn't break, but it can't hold the snow. There's no grit. Okay, so it just, but it bounces right back. Okay, like a baby that falls gets right back up. Then you've got the older branch, like an older person, where it can handle more snow, but then the more snow it's there because it's kind of hollow and rigid, it breaks.
Mm.
Just like if we fall, we're more likely to break a bone. Our bones are more brittle. Okay, our vessels are more brittle. But the more musculature we have, the more flexibility we have, the more health we have in our system, the more we can handle that fall. So the in between of that branch that is both strong and pliable and flexible can handle a lot of snow without breaking. It might bend a little bit, but it doesn't break. So that would be the ultimate form of hormesis or fitness or vitality or thriving. Because we, rather than surviving it, we're thriving it.
You just used my favorite word, which is hormesis. Thank you. Bonus
Yes.
points for you because that is my
Yay.
favorite word.
So I that's ideal. So it's not about being resilient. It's about cultivating optimal resilience, right? And being on that part of the spectrum where we're thriving instead of diving, right? We're in flourishing versus burnout. Because the more you fall, eventually you're going to feel, burnt out. And that could be emotional, psychological, physical, what have you. And so, yes, we're all resilient. The question is, where are you on the spectrum?
So, Dr. Eva, maybe define hormesis and why that is tied to resilience and maybe bring us into the brain a little bit, in terms of like what is the brain doing when we see in ourselves or other people this resilience come up?
Yeah, so I think hormesis is a terminology that we see mostly in athletes, right? So their body or they're even mentally will experience quite a bit of stress and they get stronger. So there's the notion that, and we also see this in our telomeres in the aging, that a little bit of stress allows the telomeres, which is that sort of the tail of our chromosome, to lengthen, to stay strong, which allows for longevity, for longer aging, if you will. Whereas sort of big bouts of big stress can actually cause that telomere to break, which goes again shorten our aging process. So same with sort of physical fitness and the ability to take on stress in a way that allows us to get stronger and more fit, if you will, as opposed to not having any at all and then all of a sudden being, thrown some stress and breaking. So that's the same thing that's happening with our brain. When it's experiencing different challenges, it allows for neuroplasticity. It allows for different that those challenges allow our mind to start thinking in different ways and problem solving in different neuronal networks to form that allow our brain to become more creative, more viable, more open. Even when you use different muscle groups, you do different exercises that use different muscle groups, those open up the different neurons in your brain. and allow for that neuroplasticity. So that is, again, an example of where where challenges allow for a system to thrive and grow and become more resilient, as opposed to sort of doing nothing and then being thrown with a challenge, and then, things break and can't manage.
Yeah, let's talk about neuroplasticity because you mentioned that, and I think it's really important to think about neuroplasticity as it can be good and bad, meaning, I can develop a bad habit tick-wise with neuroplasticity. It just means that the brain is rewiring, right? I could, over time, slump over and get really bad posture because of stress. I could tighten my jaw and clench my teeth or grind my teeth at night. That's neuroplastic. It didn't used to exist, but now it is part of me. Maybe talk about like what is the tipping point or the determinant, the factor that sends the neuroplasticity into something that is desirable versus something that is just, you're kind of it's a cope or it's not desirable long term. It's just a short term fix. What do you think happens there? With this, I agree with you. This biological process of hormesis and neuroplasticity is happening, but isn't it up to us to like figure out where to direct that power? Versus it accidentally turning us into something we don't want to become.
Yeah, and this is where the awareness comes in, okay? Because yes, yes, and yes to all of that. But when let's reel it in and get back to the self and why we exist and how we exist, right? Every living organisms, our goal is to get to homeostasis, which is the steady state, the state of balance, quiet, safety, if you will, where the system is saying, I'm okay. I am enough. I have enough. I'm okay. All is well. Okay. Every living organism exists that way. Now, that steady state of balance is impossible to maintain in a living, breathing system that's constantly changing. So, therefore, the system needs some type of warning system that says there's a threat to my balance, which is called stress. That's all stress is a threat to the state of balance. And now I need to do something about it. So it initiates a stress response, and that stress response initiates the changes that will then solve the problem so I can get back into homeostasis, a term called allostasis, the ability to achieve stability through change. In layperson's terms, it's called flow, being in a state of flow. An example, right? Stress. I'm sitting here and all of a sudden, my left butt cheek starts tingling.
I was just going to say that's happening to me right now.
Well, there we go.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
your left butt
I'm gonna
cheek is now
reposition.
sending signals to the brain, and the brain then sends signals to the body to move, to shift positions. And now I've shifted my position, and now my left butt cheek isn't numb anymore, so I'm back in homeostasis.
Nice.
Okay? It's really that simple as far as how we're designed. We are designed to seek relief to get back into a state of steadiness, of okayness. So we are wired through our senses. Our senses pick up what's happening in our external environment and internal environment. We have sensory perception that then sends signals to the brain. And then the brain will send out a decision of what to do about it so that you can get back into this steady state, into a state of balance. It's called adaptation. And so it sounds super easy, right? I'm cold, I put on something warm. I'm hungry, I get something to eat. My body's uncomfortable, I shift positions. That would be all fine and dandy if we didn't have such a complex brain.
Mm.
And the thing about our brain is it is beautiful because it can innovate and create and think, but at the same time, we have emotions that start anticipating and worrying and so much other psychology around it, so that the brain is perceiving threats to be there that may or may not be there. And so what happens is, especially as your brain is developing the first 12 years of life when you don't have really much of a brain, you're starting to figure out who you are. You're starting to think you're not thinking your body, you're just developing coping habits, right? Adaptive habits. When I do this, that bad feeling goes away. When I do that, that bad feeling goes away. And what happens is the brain is releasing dopamine and other neurotransmitters to say, I feel better. Or it's those neurotransmitters are being withdrawn, I feel worse. So I'm going to move away from the behavior that causes me to feel worse and towards the behavior that helps me feel good. So there's no sense about it. There's no rationalization about it. It's just I'm doing this because it feels good, and I'm doing this because I'm not doing that because that feels bad. And so you start developing personality traits and habits before you've even developed much of a brain. Your major intelligent brain, your rational brain, doesn't even fully develop until your late 20s. But meanwhile, the template of and your behavior patterns is already set. And so then you find yourself as an older adult saying, "Oh, when I play these video games or when I sit like this, you know, it feels better temporarily." So you used to develop these coping habits that when I drink, when I eat, when I do this, I can get through my life. So yes, the neuroplasticity is forming as a way for you to cope, but it's maladaptive. What does that mean? Is that it's not conducive for pliability, flexibility, adaptability long term. It's actually hurting me long term because it's maladaptive, right? It's sort of the difference between I'm hungry and I eat. That's a problem solved back in balance versus I'm anxious and I eat. The eating is producing dopamine and serotonin, which is temporarily helping me feel better so that I can could keep going, but it's not actually solving the reason am I anxious. So that stress response is still firing, which is creating a load we call an allostatic load on the system.
You're adapting. You're adapting.
I'm adapting and I'm getting back into balance. If I'm not getting back to balance, if I don't solve the problem, the stress response will keep firing. What does that mean? So when I'm perceiving stress, imagine you're being chased by a lion, okay? It's not a good time to go to sleep. It's not a good time to forage for food. It's not a good time to mate, okay? So what's happening is adrenaline, cortisol, inflammatory markers are coursing through the body and the brain to keep you hyper alert, hyper aroused, shut down digestive mechanisms, shut down reproductive mechanisms, move away from your fingers and toes because you don't need them. So blood vessel constriction, increase heart rate, increase respiratory rate, increase inflammation, increase catabolism, which is the breakdown of your fatty acids and muscles and proteins and so on and so forth. And also the shutting down of your higher cognition because it's not the time to figure out how to do your taxes. You need to go from point A to point B. So in the short term, that physiological response is really beneficial because it motivates action. So once the stress has been taken care of, that those physiological changes stop. Systems back in balance. So it doesn't affect the body in a negative way. But if that challenge is not heeded to, that stress response keeps firing. So if, let's say, I'm anxious and my coping mechanism is food, I temporarily will lower that stress response a little bit. But the reason I'm anxious hasn't been solved.
Mhm.
So that's still causing the stress response to fire, not to mention probably what I've chosen to eat,
Mhm.
comfort foods and that sort of thing enhances inflammation or whatever that is that's not conducive for a lifelong lived. The psychology is creating the stress response activation. So now becomes an allostatic load because the stress response is firing on multiple levels psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, physically, physiologically, and so on and so forth. So now it's becoming a load, and that system can only handle it for so long.
So let's talk about the reality of especially people who live in the Western world and what their brain is going through every day. That's why I wanted you to unpack that allostatic load. So you're saying like, it never gets turned off. And so it's constantly saying, hey, deal with me. Hey, respond to me. Hey, adapt to me. But the adaptation could be overeating or it could be other kinds of addictive behaviors. And what I'm seeing more and more in everyone, I was at a spa yesterday, waiting for a massage, and they have like a little waiting room. And this woman who was probably a younger end of millennial, like my kid's age, was sitting there on her phone. The woman beyond her, who appeared to be early in a pregnancy of some kind, was just sitting there kind of relaxing. She was a little bit older than the woman between us. And I was just noting to myself that, she pulled out her phone multiple times. She was battling with herself. And I was like, bless your heart. And I meant that in every way. Like, I had so much compassion for the compulsion of the addiction that her brain, the loop that her brain is in when she's in silence, when she doesn't have anything to fidget with or to do, and she's sitting there with two strange ladies, one on either side of her, and, whatever her brain's been through. I wanna know, how do you help people these days that are undergoing a barrage of triggers and information, and I call it the bad news. It's not just the news, I think we should call it for what it is, the bad news, and social media all flooding these circuits that, are prehistoric and, don't have any idea what to do with this level of stimulation. Like, what have you come to? Because I'm frankly overwhelmed by it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and the thing about it is that it is addictive. The screen is addictive. It every time, again, it's sort of, the need for information. That's a stress. And so that when you actually get the information, there's a dopaminergic reward system is activated. So when that screen time is activating those it is exactly like being addicted to anything else, that screen. So it's absolutely right. And when Alan and I wrote our book 15 years ago, whenever, almost 15 years ago, um, the screen time was an issue back then. And bad news was an issue back then that was enhancing and increasing overwhelm and anxiety and depression and attention deficit and cognitive fatigue and so on and so forth. And now it's, that much worse. So it is a real issue. It's not just something you're seeing in the spot. It is overwhelming, and more people are spending less time in nature. More and more people are spending more time on screen, and they're spending less time being physically active and being actually socially connected. And that's really the key here, is that human beings evolved with these traits because somehow, living on this earth has always been hard. It's always been filled with catastrophe. I always, when I came out of my hard place, it was because I just sort of woke up one day and I said, I was walked around depressed for like 5, 6 months. And I realized, nature just as soon lets a forest fire burn as a flower bloom. You know, there's always going to be something. How we respond to it has to change and has to start with us. Like, what part of me feels unloved? And so the first thing is starting with self-compassion and understanding that it is hard, it is overwhelming, it is difficult, always has been. And we evolved as humans with all these coping mechanisms that allowed us to mitigate that uncertainty, which is other people, social support. It was nature. We never lived separate from it as we do now. It was moving our bodies and being physically active. It was taking time to pause and just be present and be with the sunset, which we now call meditation. It was eating what was naturally available when we had it. We cherished it. We loved it. We just were so grateful for when we had something because there's times we went without. So there's all these things that we call mind body medicine and that we need to do research on to say, oh, you need this. This is what's going to help us out of it. But that's what has helped our ancestors out of it. And that the major issue here is an absence of love. It's an inability to be in that state of knowing that I have love, I am love, I'm surrounded by love. And if I'm not, I'm going to create that. And so when I feel that way within myself, I don't need all this other things. I don't need to get the dopaminergic reward responses all the time because I already have it. So then the question is how? How do I get there? And that's where all of us, so many of us are providing all these practices and other outlets to solely, you know, mitigate some of these addictions that are helping us cope with real life issues.
So one of the things that's coming out is that, and I'm just going to throw you a ball here and see what you do with it. GLP-1 is a daughter molecule of oxytocin, which is, the connection hormone, whether you're connected around being, a terrible person or a wonderful person. We get into gangs, we get into tribes, we get into, you know, groups, clans, whatever, to and feel just that belonging drive that you're talking about. Um, Now I'm distinguishing that from love because, I'm with you on the love side, but I want to just, unpack this first. So GLP-1 right now, a lot of studies are coming out about its ability to fight addiction. And in my work, I work on habenula research and translating that into behavior and things like that, and the habenula is kind of like the brake pedal for behavior and the aversion locus and, what we avoid more than anything, and so when the GLP-1 attaches or docks into the habenula, it turns it off, therefore, our brakes go out on stopping ourself from being addicted is the idea of that, and so, um why so I'm almost seeing like a circuit here between both of our comments where, love engenders a boost of oxytocin. I think most people are depleted of oxytocin, which is why we're injecting it or taking it as a pill in the form of GLP-1, in at least one of the daughters of this molecule, right? And disrupting our addiction. And without that, then the addiction comes in to almost backfill. Is that
That's
correct, do you
correct.
think? Yeah.
Yes, I 100% agree, and this is why I came back to it starts with the self, right? Because if I don't have love within myself or I'm not in a state of love myself, I don't have enough oxytocin, in my system, and even more so oxytocin receptors to take that hormone in, to turn that off. I will seek it outside of myself. And so that's where sort of that love and addiction get intertwined because I can fall in love with the wrong person or the wrong group because they temporarily help me feel better because I don't know the self, right? And I and which is why if we go look at these medications, whether it's oxytocin or GLP-1s, why the therapy that is so important to go alongside with those medications.
Mm.
Because I'm still doing something that's stopping a physiological trait. But if my mindset and my belief system isn't changed alongside with it, the minute those are removed, it's gonna go back to what it was.
Yeah.
So, it's sort of yes, there is a physical, physiological component, and there's also the awareness component of what's really going on here. I think it's just this is the research is so beautiful and compelling to support us in that process, in saying that, yes, this is why love is blind. That's why, love on its own is incomplete. Fear is necessary, right? The negativity, the stress that happens in life, it's necessary. It allows us to have that sort of realistic understanding of what is and who I am.
Can I go into what so when I was 30, I became aware of my self-loathing, talking about your
Mm,
awareness.
yes.
And, of course, the antidote is self-love.
Mhm.
And it's almost like a holy grail search, like, where the heck do I go to find self-love, you
Right.
know? And you mentioned therapy. My answer was to go on an 8-mile hike
Yes.
into the Four Corners area of the Rockies and almost die, almost pitching off the side of a cliff, because I couldn't jump over this snow melt stream that was going down, and I got caught up in it. And but there was a moment where nature, being out there, I was fasting. This is my one of my annual vision quests that I do. I was fasting, and by day 4, 5, I'm weak, really weak. And I crawl up with my last strength up on this boulder pre-dawn, and I'm sitting there like, "This trip is almost over. I can't find self-love. I don't know where the heck is self-love?" I'm just indignant and angry, and all of a sudden, the sun comes up over the ridge and just like, pew, like, pierces my forehead, and I just understood it.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that would be kind of like magic in most people's
Yeah.
definitions, but connect for us the dots between, like, why nature can help us discover or understand love in a way that maybe other mechanisms are devoid.
I love this so much. That I love this question so much, and one of the reasons is that I have this conversation with people all the time who say, "Oh, it's just about self-love." I'm like, "Well, but what does that really mean? Do people even know what that means?" They think, "Oh, well, I love myself, I'm gonna buy myself something." And, like you, I was when I was 28 and had this devastating year, and I realized that a lot of it was because I had self-loathing and lack of self-worth, and I thought if I had this and I, would practice, saying an affirmation, I love myself," and then the little voice inside me would say, "No, you don't, you suck." And we'd have, like, screaming matches inside of my head, and it took me, like, years to actually really understand, and so, again, let's go back to this notion of human beings, right? We are beings who happen to be human versus humans that are beings, okay? We're beings who happen to be human, and in the beingness of just being, that's where we find that love. Not doing so that I can feel loved. It's I exist and therefore I am loved, and then I do because of that,
Mm.
right? So it's rather than outside in validation of who I am and the self-love, it's the knowing. And that's what nature does for us. That when we are in nature, it's like a drop of morphine that's going into that brain and oxytocin that's flying around and natural killer cells that are getting stronger and all these beautiful things that are happening in our brain that are creating this vastness of just being that remove that sort of rigid walls around self-identity to the we identity, to the beingness where that default mode network is turned off for a while. That default mode network that's constantly ruminating and going, I'm separate, and worrying and thinking all the time. And it's quiet for a moment and being in this vast expanse of beingness. Remembering that I'm a being who happens to be human, and that being happens to be a rock, and that being happens to be a frog. And it's that the oneness of all beings that just happen to be human. That is self-love. Right? Self-love is spiritual love, is social love, it's all those things, comprised in our beingness. And so that's why I always laugh when people talk about self-love because they talk about from this sort of singular outside place, which is very hard to grasp and has different meanings for everybody. But yes,
Right.
nature reminds us of that. And it's so powerful.
Yeah, and I think you're pointing to something really vital, which is that we are so inundated in this society to think of ourselves as an individual. I even spoke to, I think about this mother who I know, single mother of teenagers, and one of her children is a special needs person, and, there's little things that people say in her community of parents that are having to deal with this, a shared situation, and one of them is like, "W that which does not kill you makes you stronger," and she's like, "I just get so enraged." With that, because I think it's what you're saying, it's like, it isolates you as this little, "I'm just this little tiny thing. I'm just this little person, and there's this big wide world that I have to have all the answers for, and all the resilient," it goes back to the resilience thing, "all the resilience thing, and I have to love myself, and I'm just this little container," and what you're pointing to, the vastness, the oneness, the ability to recognize the self as a cell within an organism, if you will, that I am part of a networked set of beings, an ecosystem, is a lot more comforting in a lot of ways, especially in the context of how all this technology makes us super lonely and disconnected, even though it's supposed to be connecting, even though it's supposed to be social, it's asocial. My daughter, was absolutely driven mad by these dating apps. It made me want to start a dating app company, frankly, because I was like,
Yeah.
I can do it better. I can, I can match people and like finding love. So let's um let's go back to love. Let's go back to love. How would you define that? I mean, I'm sure that's one of the most not controversial, but, like, most, weird parts of what you're bringing in your medicine bundle to something like Harvard, and having been at Harvard myself, one thing that I would say is consistent across all people at Harvard is the amount of self-loathing and self-flogging is consistent. It's so
Yes.
consistent.
Yes.
So, how do you get from there, where the culture is all about who can be harshest and most judgmental and most self-critical, most self-loathing in order to drive themselves to these superhuman feats and stay up all night and all these things that we do to ourselves versus, "Hey, folks, it's about oneness and love." How do you bridge those 2 extremes?
It's a very good question, and for me, again, the bridge came because that high achiever, high performer burned out early.
So she wasn't there anymore in
Well,
a
yeah,
way.
I mean,
Yeah.
she also so there's it's an interesting thing. It's sort of like that I learned early that that wasn't enough, and it wasn't real, and it wasn't authentic, and so what? When it's all said and done, so what? Um, what for? What does it all mean if you're dead and burnt out and lonely and so what? And so I learned that early, but also, like, it's fascinating. I worked with Herb Benson, who's no longer with us, and he's the one that came up with the relaxation response. He ran the Mind Body Medical Institute, which I became the medical director at Harvard. And, and his findings were that when you meditate, it turns off the stress response and improves allostasis and called that physiological change the relaxation response. And in my experience, and this happened, I was working as a primary care doctor. I was also the medical director at the institute, so high achiever, and I had a dive shop in Mexico. So I was
And a
doing
what?
all these. Yeah,
You had a
I had
dive
a
shop,
I had a dive shop in
as
Mexico.
in, like, deep sea diving?
Yes.
Okay.
This is right before 9/11, so this is, early 2000, and, so meanwhile, working al I'm moonlighting also to pay my bills, make ends meet, and also send money to Mexico because of, 9/11, and, tourism is down and trying to keep my staff afloat, and, I'm hating my job. Right, it's like right after 9/11, 2001, 2002, so major catastrophes happened in the world. I'm working 3, 4 jobs. I'm treating my patients, watching them get better, but meanwhile, I'm having panic attacks in between my patients. They're changing the medical model into what it is today, this incentive model. They're telling me they're going to change my contract, that if I don't see more patients faster, they're going to dock my pay. All these things I'm just hating. I'm driving to work and saying, "This can't be my life." And April 16th, 2002 is Boston Marathon. I'm at a Red Sox game. I get a call that my niece is about to be born, and I rush to the hospital, and because I'm on staff at that hospital, they let me help deliver this baby in the C-section, and I'm holding this bloody mess in my hands, and the time just stood still. It was like, "Oh, the gates of heaven opened up, and my brain is clear, and everything is going to be wonderful." It's like, "What just happened to me?" I thought about that later. Every time I held her, that would happen to me. And it wasn't like my stress is gone. I still hated my job, and life was hard, But every time I was with this miracle, my belief system changed, my being changed. And I said, this happens to me when I'm in nature, and this happens to me when I get into deep, deep meditation. What is this? And so I researched the research. And my colleagues in Germany had actually already written a paper on the neurobiology of love. And it was indeed very similar to the relaxation response, the meditative state, with the addition of the oxytocin and the other dopaminergic reward system that was being activated, which is actually more similar to the placebo response, which is that belief that a medication or a procedure is going to work despite it being a sham or fake. It's the power of the mind. I said, oh, that's why I go from nothing is possible to anything is possible every time I'm in the state of love. There's a physiological shift that's happening in my system, in my brain. Oh my gosh, I'm onto something. So that's why I started focusing on the love response, which is what I called it, which is the ability to connect with the state of love in whatever form, social, spiritual, or self. Call it the love pyramid in its different forms, that changes my physiological state and activates that part of my brain that now can believe in the possibility of what's out there. Now we're understanding also in quantum physics that our reality is only what we think our reality is very small compared to what it truly is. And that when we open our awareness to what is, possibilities become more infinite instead of not possible. So now this is now the love response is now not only something that's physiologically applicable, but it's also now applicable to this new science and quantum physics
Mm.
and manifestation or whatever people want to call it. But it's actually the reality of what we actually can see versus what our limited sight, which again, when I describe the fight or flight, our ability to think clearly, rationalize, becomes smaller like a horse with blinders. But it's also disconnecting our ability to socialize, connect, have our hearts open, and imagine possibilities, and even our bodies to heal, aka the placebo response. So that's love in all its forms when we access it.
Absolutely. And I love that the love response came before you've written 6 books. Love response came before your brain on nature, and just like to land on maybe a love note to nature, to Mother Nature, because it is the source from which we come and will return.
That's right.
Our molecules will cycle full cycle. You talk about the cycles of nature, and I know you have dealt with caregiving. I caregave my father and lost him in 2020, and so we are not strangers to the death process or to the caregiving process or to the illness process, right? It's a blessing to be able to see that impermanence, right? What would you say is the power of nature as we are nature? We are part of nature, and oftentimes I think modern humans have really lost the plot around like, "Oh, we are those things. We have the same DNA molecules, we have the same, physiological processes." Yeah, just as a love note to Mother Nature, what would you say?
Yeah, it makes me think of the saying that, we often say, oh, it's just a drop in the ocean. I'm just a drop in the ocean, but we're also the ocean in a drop. Right? And so and absolutely our modern day lives where we live in cities and concrete jungles and sit on computers and really are disconnected from source, and that source is nature. We have a microbiome, which is we wrote that Ellen and I, my co-author and I wrote about again in 2011, 2012. And we talked about the microbiome and mental health. And the microbiome is not different than that microbiome that lives in the soil. And so it's sort of it's like where have we come to that we're so removed from where we've come from and that we have forgotten. We have forgotten that we came from Mother Earth's womb, and we will go back to that womb. And so I would leave people with remembering that to try to remember that you are within Mother Earth's womb. To know that that's soulless, that love is there, and to find the time. And really, the research is just saying that for health benefits, improved mental health, spiritual health, physical health, and it's really not so much just 120 minutes a week of nature time, and then go up to 300, maybe 350. That's when it sort of reaches its plateau, but it's not that much time. We used to
Yeah.
say we thought it was 20 minutes a day, and it's less than that. Maybe what is it? Between 15 and 20 minutes a day is all you need of nature time for that reconnection, for the general health and well-being, for longevity, restoration. So it's not so much.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of the work that Roger Schultz doing on, infrared light that, can penetrate 3 layers of clothing. Even if you're outside, maybe walk for one of your breaks at work, be outside if you can handle the weather wherever you are, whether it's too hot or too cold.
Right.
But, just even getting that passive sun rays in there, even if you have glasses on, even if you have heavy clothes on, it benefits your health because it activates your mitochondria. There's other brain benefits of that. So I think you're spot on there. And, thank you so much for just spotlighting the important aspects of health and life and brain and nature and love. And I think we just wide ranged, you know, this whole thing pretty well. Um, Maybe let's end on when you have, I know that you do a lot of executive coaching and a lot of leadership stuff, and you're in with people who are very, have a very high pressure, high stress jobs, who are leading large organizations, whatever the case may be. But for all of us, what do you think is the kind of universal things that we could do every day? Maybe it goes back to the nature walk or whatever it is that you really stand on, that you always think is a good idea for all of us to follow.
I think my number one recommendation is start and how you start your day. And I know some people have to wake up super early, 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. I work for myself, so I can wake up a little bit later. But even so, having a luxurious morning, setting your morning tone. So, how you wake up, right? Rather than jumping out of bed or well, waking up and saying, I'm grateful, feeling the quilt or the sheets on your skin, taking some deep breaths and remembering that you are here on this earth and that Mother Earth is greeting you for the day. And as you put your feet on the ground, earthing, saying, I'm here. I am here. I'm awake. I'm here. And good morning to me. And then what I usually do is boil the water and I make my thing of hot water. And then I have a thing of decaf and I actually get back in bed. I drink my water and I luxuriate with my water and, think good thoughts or do sort of a gratitude practice. And so my morning is, I have a whole meditation practice for my morning, but that's before I meditate. That's just sort of having a sort of slow kind of start, remembering that the rest of the day is often going to belong to somebody else. But to remember that there's the beauty and richness in the pauses. And that first pause can start in the morning, and then we can do maybe hour and the hour of a pause where if you want to do deep breathing, if you want to take a walk in nature, if you want to, um, you know, do a gratitude practice or whatever else somebody has taught you, to take those moments to luxuriate in that time to be with self and other and something greater than the reminder of who we truly are. And
Mm,
so whether you are a high achiever, not a high achiever, whatever that may, it doesn't matter. You're living in this world that's often difficult. And if you just take that moment, could be 10 seconds, could be 1 minute, could be 10 minutes throughout the day to pause, restore, reset, and then you can keep going.
mm, love it. Thank you for being so human. Thank you for being so honest. Thank you for being approachable. I think sometimes when there's a Harvard on your resume or an MD at the end of your name, people can other you. People can be like, "Oh," but the fact that you tell your story of your own devastation, your own kind of like I'll call it the ego death. I don't know if that's what you use, but, it seems like there was a part of you that just, like,
Mul
did
multiple
not.
times.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But you're
It
showing how
was.
you're showing how it's done, and it doesn't matter any of these, like, status symbols or these names or these brands that you carry, like, you're really piercing through that, and you're saying that what matters at the end of the day is love and gratitude and connection, and that fuels our willingness to go through this hard experience together, and it is together. So, Dr. Eva, thank you so much for your wisdom, and, where can people find your work? What's the best place to find you?
Well, you can go to my website at drselhub.com. And also, I wanted to let people know about a new program that I have out, just a few months old. It's called The Foundations of Mastering Resilience, which is on learnworlds.com, that you can get through my website. And for podcasts and webinars, I offer people a coupon. It's Resilience 555, and you can use that. It gets you a discount off the program. And it's really, I developed it for people to have because not everyone is going to work with me. And it's 10 weeks of videos and audio meditations and workbooks and references and questionnaires and all kinds of things that you can do to elevate your resilience. It covers all these topics and gives you a bunch of tools that you'll have for life.
We all need that these days, so, that's a life raft that you're offering there, and thank you so much for, doing the online version so that more people can access who can't, access you in person, so thank you so much for having, this conversation with me, and, it was just such a sweet time together.
Thank you. I really, really loved it.